Hello everyone, this is Ma'am Crisel and welcome to an episode of discussion in the subject Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person. Before we proceed to our lesson, let me ask you these questions. When you wake up this morning, what did you do first? Did you wash your face, took a bath, or immediately walk towards the dining table for a healthy breakfast? What made you do so? Who decided what you wanted to do? If your answer is yourself, then you already have some practical application of freedom. So, for today's lesson is Freedom of the Human Person, Part 1. So, what is freedom? Freedom is the human capacity to act or not to act as we choose or prefer without any external compulsion or restraint. In simple explanation, freedom is the capacity to do whatever you want to do, whatever decisions you want to choose without restraint or without any limitations. Example, freedom of expression, freedom to act, freedom to choose your own religion, freedom to choose your own choice of strand in senior high school. That is basically the concept of freedom. It is an intrinsic and essential property of a person. Intrinsic meaning to say that it is within the totality of an individual. And let us remember that freedom is one of the most important properties we own as human beings. An important indication of human freedom is the ability to make choices and perform actions. Our freedom to act sets us apart from other beings. Say, for example, we have here on my next slide the comparison between animals and human beings. So, animals respond to commands, they are trained and conditioned to perform. And they act instinctively, meaning to say their actions are predetermined responses to a certain stimuli. While for human persons, they can choose the course of actions to take when given a stimulus or faced with a certain situation. Like, for example, the task of cleaning your room. So, you have to make this particular decision about whether to clean your room or not. So, if you choose to clean your room, when will you do it? That's the question. When will you clean your room? Is it today or tomorrow? That is again another question. So, the power to decide or the power to choose from different alternatives or choices is one of the abilities, no, that human beings possess. And that sets us apart from animals. That is basically freedom. Now, different philosophers gave their perspectives regarding freedom. We will discuss the perspectives of four philosophers about the concept of freedom. First is Aristotle's The Power of Volition. Volition or will is the cognitive process which an individual decides on and commits to a particular course of action. Take note, class, that volition or will is the power of choosing or determining, no? It means that if you do something of out of your will, you do it by choice, not because you are forced to do it. When you have a volition, you are in control of your own choices. Like, for example, when people make a choice, as to who will be their friends, no? And according to Aristotle, thinking is volitional. So, thinking is a cognitive process. It is one's ability to control of what he or she thinks, no? And according to Aristotle, there is a relationship between the will and the intellect. No? If there were no intellect or thinking, there would be no will. Like for example, you think of completing a task today because the deadline is tomorrow. So the idea remains an idea unless will converts it into action. If will decides to complete the task until today, no, then your action leads to completing a task today. But if you decide not to do it, no, your will converts it into action and that you will not do or complete the task. So, your intellect or reason guides your will in making choices. Reasoning is important in determining the nature and quality of one's choice. Since our choices are the results of our reasoning and our actions are products of our choices, the nature and quality of our choices now are a product of how we reason them out because reasoning allows us to consider various factors, assess the potential outcomes or consequences of different choices, and evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of each option. Remember class na sa isang pagdedesisyon, napakahalaga na pag-isipan natin ng mabuti ang mga gagawin natin. Kung ito ba ay makabubuti sa'yo, makabubuti ba yan sa ibang tao, o baka naman ikapapahamak mo yan o ng ibang tao. So, the will of humanity is an instrument of free choice. If that is the case, it is within the power of everyone to be good or bad or worthy or worthless, no? So, the happiness of every human being is in his or her own hands, no? From or for Aristotle, a human being is rational. Reason is a divine characteristic. Based from the views of Aristotle, it is important for us to use our power to think and to rationalize things in making decisions and in exercising our freedom. The second philosopher is Saint Thomas Aquinas. So, for Saint Thomas Aquinas, freedom is spirituality and love. Freedom for Saint Thomas is a manner intellectual beings seek universal goodness. It is a condition of a will arising from our nature being in the kind of world that we inhabit. So for Aquinas, freedom is not simply the ability to choose between options. Rather, freedom is the capacity to choose what is good and to act on that choice. So, our nature as rational creatures is oriented towards the good. And true freedom is only possible when we choose the good in accordance with our nature. So for Thomas Aquinas, no, goodness is God, and intellect and the will of man can rule over free will. No, so we use our freedom to seek God, and in seeking God, we do good. We choose the right course of action. No, we do what is right and avoid bad or evil doings. Okay, so St. Thomas considers the human being as a moral agent. Moral agent means that a person who has the ability to discern right from wrong and to be held accountable on his or her actions. As a moral agent, a person has the responsibility to cause no harm. So, we have this particular situation where you need to make a choice. Say, for example, you notice that cheating is happening in your class. So, it is your principle that cheating is wrong and that should not be tolerated kasi halimbawa ganun ka pinalaki ng mga magulang mo, okay, so cheating is wrong and it should not be tolerated. So as a moral agent you need to do what is right, no, and what is right, ano bang tama, are you going to tell your classmate to stop because what she or he is doing is actually wrong, or you're going to report it to your advisor or subject teacher simply because it is not right and cheating is not something to be tolerated. So that is a moral agent. In continuation, our spirituality separates us from animals. It delineates moral dimension of our fulfillment in an action. Through our spirituality, we have a conscience. Whether we choose to be good or evil becomes our responsibility. In St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, he establishes the existence of God as a first cause, that according to him, someone or something must have caused the world to exist. Aquinas further stated that this cause, which is outside our world, is the first cause. That is the one that started everything. This cause is God, and the effect is our world. As God's creations, human beings have the unique power to change themselves and things around them for the better. We have a conscience because of our spirituality.
Our third philosopher is Jean Paul Sartre in his perspective on individual freedom. Existentialism is a philosophical movement known for its inquiry on human existence, which means to exist. In existentialism class, we analyze the existence of human beings. For Sartre, the human person builds the road to the destiny of his or her choosing. He or she is the creator. Sartre's existentialism stems from this principle: existence precedes essences, meaning humans are solely responsible for their actions because we choose who we are, and that every individual is responsible for creating purpose or meaning in their own lives. We alone create and build our road. Sartre emphasizes the importance of free individual choice, regardless of the power of other people to influence and coerce our desires, beliefs, and decisions. So, according to Jean Paul Sartre's individual freedom, we alone determine the meaning and purpose of our life. Freedom means exercising our capacity to make decisions, change our life path, and direct the course of our lives through our own steering. Meaning to say, you are the captain of your ship. It's your choice what to think, how to spend your time, or who you want to be. Now, we alone determine the meaning and purpose of life. The future you get depends on the decisions that you make. Freedom is something that is exercised through our choices. We also have three philosophers who shared a common idea about social contract theory. These are Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Jean Locke. Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke define the freedom of an individual in the context of having a government to rule them, or what we call contract, which is the basis of notion of moral obligation and duty. What they are trying to say is that it is the moral obligation or duty of the people living together in the society to follow the contract or agreement between them and the state that establishes moral and political rules of behavior. So basically, the government here plays a major role in the functioning of society because it ensures that the rights of its people are protected by the laws it implements. If we do not have a government to rule us, anong mangyayari? 'Di ba? There will also be no law to exist. Walang batas, walang restrictions sa actions natin. So, there will be violence everywhere kung choice ng isang tao na gumawa ng hindi maganda, 'di ba? Walang makakapigil kasi nga wala namang batas to regulate one's actions. So, everything is in chaos. Thus, social contract is an agreement where individuals sacrifice an amount of their freedom and submit to a higher authority. Example, no? During the pandemic, we tend to sacrifice an amount of our freedom for our safety against the deadly virus, no? Our government or the authorities implemented curfews, face masks were mandated by the government now to curb the spread of the virus. So, this particular concept of social contract focuses on the fact that man exercises freedom within the bounds of laws, meaning to say that as we exercise our freedom, there has to be limitation. It has limitations when your freedom inflicts harm on yourself and other people. So it is a necessity that we must assure for the government and people to work as one. No? From this understanding also arises certainty that we have freedom. For example, as citizens of our country, we need to follow our government. No? By following our government, we need to sacrifice a portion of our freedom. But in return, it is the task or duty of the government to protect and serve us, di ba? It's like a give and take relationship between the government and its people. According to John Jacques Rousseau, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. While it is true that freedom is an essential property of an individual, we should also recognize that as we exercise our freedom, we still have limitations. Now, we continue our discussion regarding the kinds of freedom. The first kind of freedom is what we call physical freedom. This refers to the absence of any physical restraint. The person has the freedom of mobility to go where he or she wants to go. Before the pandemic, people were free to travel wherever in the world they wanted or kahit kailan nila gusto. Diba? They can. However, when the pandemic hits, there are travel restrictions. People cannot easily go outside their homes, no. During the pandemic, you are not free to go to school and have this face-to-face learning. You miss seeing your friends, your classmates, and other loved ones, no, personally, as well as your relatives who are away from your home. So, in this situation, you don't have that what we call physical freedom. Take note, the keyword here is freedom of mobility. Okay, that is physical freedom. The second kind of freedom is what we call psychological freedom, and it is also called as freedom of choice. So the person is free to perform actions that he or she considers right and wise. A person is also free to act or not to act. And psychological freedom is innate and cannot be denied as a person. Example, the freedom to choose your friends, the freedom to choose your partner, freedom to choose your course in college, freedom to be what you want to be. So those are basically some examples of psychological freedom. The third kind of freedom is what we call moral freedom. This is using freedom in a manner that upholds human dignity and goodness. Like, for example, doing charitable works, participating on outreach activities. This might mean donating clothes or goods for victims of typhoon. Okay? Also, giving alms to the needy. Okay, serving meals during feeding programs. So those are all kinds of these examples of moral freedom. Thirdly, being sensitive to the needs of others. This might include when your friend has a problem, you give your time to listening and giving friendly advice. Okay, number five, participating volunteer works like volunteering on disaster relief operations. We have here the concept of positive and negative freedom. Negative freedom refers to the absence of interference, the absence of coercion or interference. We mean that the freedom to do whatever you want. Okay, it is considered negative because you failed to use freedom in a responsible manner. While positive freedom is the kind of freedom that requires active effort, has control or mastery of his or herself, and has the strength to do what is good. So, class, this is doing the right thing and exercising our freedom in a responsible manner. Take note of that. For example, you will finish first the school requirements before hanging out with your friends. No? Again, negative freedom is basically doing what you want regardless of the consequences of your action. So kahit na makakasakit ka, gagawin mo pa rin ang isang bagay. Okay? While positive freedom is being mindful or being prudent with your actions. Yan. Okay? So it is important that we should practice positive freedom. The last concept that we need to discuss is absolute freedom. In absolute freedom, there is no form of hindrance that would prevent you from doing what you want. In other words, this is doing what you want without restrictions or limitations. So, the question now is, should freedom be absolute? Definitely no. Freedom has always had its limitations. Freedom is always coupled with responsibility. As a summary of the session, we discussed the concept of freedom, the perspectives of various philosophers about freedom, of course, the kinds of freedom. We have the physical, the moral, and psychological freedom. We also discussed the difference between negative and positive freedom. Lastly, the concept of absolute freedom. So, once again, this is Ma'am Crisel, and see you for another episode of New Learnings in our subject, Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person.